Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 11th of October. Thanks for joining us tonight. As always, you can get your latest forecast information over the phone on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. And if you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to email me anytime. david.snider@noaa.gov is the easy way to find me, and I'll try and reply just as quickly as I can. One word to mention, AFN. If you're heading to the AFN convention next week, I'll see you there. Make sure you stop by the NOAA booth where we can talk about Alaska weather, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see more of. We'll talk about sea ice, we can talk about river forecasts, and a lot of our meteorologists and hydrologists from Anchorage, Juneau, and Fairbanks will be there. So make sure you come by and say hello at very least. And we'd love for you to take one of the pins and stick it on our map to let us know what village you're representing while you're in Anchorage next week. So again, make sure you stop by and say hello at AFN next week. Let's take a look at the Alaska warning map tonight. We're watching the eastern Alaska range for some high winds. Strong southerly winds will be flowing in once again as we go into later tonight and tomorrow and all the way into the weekend. Looks like those strong southerly winds will ramp up to about maybe 50-60 miles per hour. They're generally west of the Tote Cutoff. It's a very similar pattern to what we just went through. And again, that will produce some generally drier weather on the north-facing side of the Alaska range. So again, the eastern Alaska range, a wind advisory in effect again starting late tonight and into tomorrow and going for about 2 days as we expect to see some stronger wind gusts as this next weather system passes over. Other than that, windy conditions are possible in south central and southwest as this next wave moves up from the eastern Aleutians. You can see it tracking eastward right now. It's got a pretty sharp cutoff there on the clouds. That's a sign of the very dry air mass coming in right behind the frontal boundary. And out across the east, we see what happened to the last one. Another wave of rainfall still working its way out of southeastern Alaska. By tomorrow morning, might still be some pockets of drizzle or a very brief light rainfall around, but chances are you'll be dealing with fog more than any heavy precipitation. But there is some there today. Speaking of heavy precipitation, we saw pockets of thunderstorm activity around Valdez earlier today. Around the northern Prince William Sound side, there was some thunderstorm activity that might drift a little bit closer to the outer coast of southeast later on tonight. We'll keep watch on that. Up north, a lot of moisture is working northward ahead of that, or as part of the last wave. And it has been cold enough for snow in some of the higher terrain, but also some of the lower terrain, and not too far above Fairbanks, maybe only a couple hundred feet, it did snow. But for official weather records, of course, and for Fairbanks, where some of the longest weather records in the entire state have been kept, it didn't snow yet, not that we know of. So unless that changes today, we'll tie for the latest first season snow on record in Fairbanks. If it doesn't snow until tomorrow, well, then we've set a new record. So it's been a little slow in coming there for the Middle Tanana Valley. Don't be surprised if you see a new record coming out of Fairbanks for the latest seasonal snow, first snow in weather record history there. So kind of impressive stuff. It has been warm, but ice is forming up across the Arctic coast and certainly well to the north of that. Make sure you stick around for the sea ice update here in just a few minutes as we get to our marine segment. Looking out to the west, you can see a broad area of cloud cover across southwestern Alaska and Bristol Bay. That is a pretty healthy dose of low pressure. And ahead of that, a pretty decent flow of southerly winds working up through the southwestern coast. Behind that, also an equally strong northwesterly flow working through, and we'll continue to see that pattern play out. There's yet another storm working its way into the picture as we head toward the end of the weekend. So a lot of hit and miss clouds across the mainland today, but really the focus will be precipitation and wind, and of course a little bit of snow up north, though no significant snowfall is expected in any one place at this point. Low pressure is down to 988 millibars this afternoon. As that moves toward Bristol Bay, there are some pockets of heavier rainfall around Prince William Sound, and as I mentioned, a healthy dose of lightning strikes in a fairly concentrated area in the northern Sound today. Heavier rainfall slowly pulling out of southeastern Alaska to be replaced by a healthy amount of clouds and likely some low stratus and fog as we start up tomorrow morning. As you look at the middle and upper Yukon Valley, there has been snow, a lot of that not reaching the lower terrain thanks to a lot of that drying wind making its way over the mountains. You can see a northerly flow across most of the Bering Sea. The speckled clouds indicate some pretty cold air in the upper parts of the atmosphere, but down below it hasn't gotten terribly cold just yet. The winds have settled down a little bit, and they'll continue to be gentle, at least as we head through tonight and early tomorrow morning. But you'll notice that gales are likely coming back up across northern parts of the Gulf, and we expect some higher winds to develop across the outer coast as we get into Friday and Saturday for parts of southeast. So keep watch on that. Up north for the Brooks Range and the North Slope, it will be a little bit more likely to start seeing some snow showers there, especially at higher terrain, but also along the north coast where temperatures will be hovering very close to freezing by daytime and cooling off even more as we head through the nighttime hours. So look for lows at least in the 20s. Across the Bering Strait communities, St. Lawrence Island out toward the northern part of the Yukon Delta and into Norton Sound, rainfall still possible as this low pressure system is bringing in a healthy dose of warm and wet air. But you can see where that transition is occurring here along this pink shaded boundary that includes places like Kotzebue all the way out towards Shishmaref. Pockets of rain and snow may mix together, so don't be surprised if you see some snowflakes mixing in. Around the Pribilofs, it looks like rain for you, and most of the central and eastern Aleutians will be dealing with rainfall and a persistent west and northwesterly wind. By Friday, you can see high pressures trying to take charge of southeast, but a look to the west shows that's not going to last terribly long. A healthy southerly flow is working out of the northern Gulf and toward Prince William Sound. Moderate to occasionally heavy rainfall is possible there, but everything to the west of the Alaska Range looks a lot more showery in nature as low pressure hovers there in the Bering at 987 millibars. That means we're sending a lot of southerly wind up across the Brooks Range, and with that moisture and the colder part of the season, we're getting snow showers there. From Arctic Village and westward all the way to the North Slope. Don't be surprised to run into that. And we're also going to be dealing with fog. A little bit more of an easterly flow will be found across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast all the way out to the Chukchi Coast. A look to the west shows low pressure is starting to build back in, but in between that storm and what we have in the Bering, a ridge of high pressure is breaking up the cloud cover a little bit. You may see some of those effects around Adak and maybe as far west as Kiska. But as we get into Saturday, that low is moving very quickly to the east and dropping in its intensity to 968 millibars. One low is working its way through south central, and here comes the wind we were talking about across southeastern Alaska. Watch for periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain there. A lot of that and wind will be working through the region. And if you're paying attention to marine conditions, make sure you're watching out for any marine warnings as we go into the weekend. Around Prince William Sound, low pressure will work through the region from southwest to north and east, and that'll take the triple point, the combination of the occluded front, the warm front, and the cold front, and its heaviest precipitation generally east of Prince William Sound. The western side of that will remain unsettled, with showers and clouds continuing across most of the Alaska Range and a large part of south central as well. Northward, we expect to see periods of rain and snow showers across the eastern Brooks Range and the upper Yukon Valley. The Chukchi Coast from Utqiagvik all the way down toward Point Hope, we expect to see rain and snow showers persisting there. Low pressure still hovers in the Bering, and of course we have the wind coming with the next system again at 968 millibars on Saturday. So a pretty active weather pattern will continue to move through our region. Let's take a look at temperatures though and see how that changes. As we head into tonight, mid to upper 20s for most of the North Slope, the upper Yukon Valley, and the southeastern Brooks Range will hover in the teens and 20s too. Eagle about 19, 21 in Northway, so certainly some cold air out there. 30s and 40s for southeast, though, where it's wet and windy and not quite so cold. South central mid-40s for you, and we're dipping into the 30s now for Galena, up toward Kotzebue, Shishmaref holding at 38. Southwestern temperatures will stay in the lower to mid-40s. That includes places like Dillingham and King Salmon, Lake Iliamna, about 47 degrees there. And 46 around Kodiak, mid-40s for most of the chain, 43 in St. Paul. Savunga will go from the lower 40s to about 47 degrees by Friday afternoon. Notice the North Slope hovers just at or above freezing there, so it's certainly getting cold enough to keep temperatures down. 40s and some 50s for most of the Yukon Valley and the Kuskokwim Delta as well. Looks like Bethel, you'll see temps nearing 50 degrees, 52 in Kodiak, upper 40s and lower 50s for South Central. Southeast should make it into the lower 50s throughout the day. Yakutat about 52 with Fairbanks holding at 50 degrees. By Saturday morning, temperatures up north are cooling down just a bit more. You'll notice overnight lows in the mid to upper 20s, about 28 in Utqiagvik, 26 in Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse also in the mid-20s. As you get down toward Kotzebue and Shishmaref, we'll see temps just below that 40-degree mark, 42 in Nome. Galena's looking at 36 degrees, Ambler 35, Bettle's about 28. The middle Tanana Valley will see temps just above freezing, it looks like. Again, that southerly wind will keep temperatures up for you. Upper 30s and lower 40s for many in southwest, including the inland areas up toward McGrath. 42 around Kodiak, lower to mid-40s for most of the chain, and the Pribilofs holding around 43 degrees. Southeast will see lows in the lower to mid-40s there. Petersburg, head out to Klawock and Craig, even higher. Temps there not going that close to 40 degrees by the end of the night. Homer about 42, Whittier near 40 degrees, and Anchorage also closing in on that 40-degree mark fairly quickly. By the afternoon, look for highs in the lower 50s there, heading up toward Talkeetna, about 50 degrees for you. Healy 46, 50 in Fairbanks, lower 40s for Eagle and Northway, upper 40s and low 50s for most of Southeast. The North Slope warms up just a little bit more over Friday, lower to mid-30s in fact, but Kaktovik may not do that, 29 degrees for you. Lower 40s for most of Kotzebue Sound. Nome, Tin City, out toward Deering. We're looking at temperatures in the mid to upper 40s there. Gamble and Savunga, upper 40s with temperatures closing in on the 50-degree mark for parts of Southwest, including Port Hayden all the way out toward Pilot Point, 53 in Sandpoint, 47 in St. Paul, and 50 for Adak and Atka, as well as those out in Attu. Let's take a look at the climate outlook now as we go into the end of October. It looks like above average temperatures are expected statewide, with the most likely above normal readings anywhere south of the Yukon Valley into southwest, south central, and southeastern Alaska, all potentially well above normal. As we look at the climate outlook for precipitation, you'll notice the possibility of wetter than average weather as well, and that is primarily focused on south central Alaska with slightly higher signals for the inland areas, North Slope, and parts of southeastern Alaska. A lot going on there. We'll take a look at things in just a few minutes. Stick with us.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather now, IFR conditions are expected to continue across the North Slope for your Friday morning and also across areas along and just north of the Yukon Valley up to the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. Ambler and Bettles, you'll be involved in that. All the way down to about Galena or so, just west out toward Unalakleet. You'll see some improvement there. In fact, there might even be a start around VFR there for a good chunk of Norton Sound over the water, closer to the coast and just to the south, all the way out toward Monarch. Expect IFR conditions there all the way through Gamble and Savunga and then back up toward Nome. Watching for IFR to start around some of your favorite Alaska Range passes as well. To the east, out of the Copper River Valley, things look pretty good. Gulkana might be flirting with MVFR. And then as you head south toward the Kenai Peninsula, you're back into MVFR fairly solidly. Portage Pass starting out at IFR. Most of southeast should be VFR, except for some of the higher terrain areas out across the Bering. Most of the chain, including the Pribilofs, and MVFR start is likely. By the afternoon, not a big change out there in the west, except for you start to see the initial changeover as the next wave of low pressures moving in from the North Pacific. The west coast is up and down, MVFR conditions there. The Brooks Range passes holding around IFR, and most of the North Slope will be at least MVFR. Some areas around Point Lay may be looking at VFR for a while. Utqiagvik and then north of Kaktovik, all IFR. IFR for Prince William Sound. Southeast looking pretty good for your Friday afternoon. VFR conditions expected there, and most of it will linger until Saturday morning, but notice Chilkoot and White Pass, you're looking at IFR conditions setting in early for the weekend start. Yakutat to Prince William Sound, Portage Pass, IFR conditions there. Your north and western Alaska Range passes also expected to be socked in. MVFR conditions for the west coast, but there will be some VFR breaks up and down the Yukon Valley, all the way from tip to tail out across the west. IFR conditions there across the western chain. Some improvement for the Alaska Peninsula all the way out toward just about the Pribilof. As you can see, that edge is very, very near St. George. Kodiak Island looking at VFR for Saturday afternoon. Relatively clear sailing anyway for the upper Yukon Valley into the Tanana Valley, but IFR will be flirting with parts of the Brooks Range out around Galena, and then also for the Chukchi Coast and east of Utqiagvik and Atkasuk as you get through your Saturday afternoon. Here's a look at the pass conditions for tomorrow. Anaktuvik and Adigan passes we saw will likely be starting at and holding around IFR conditions through most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to be IFR. Rainy Pass holding at IFR. Windy Pass and also Isabel Pass looking at an IFR day for your Friday. Mentasta Pass starting out at VFR but leaning over to marginal conditions as the day goes on. Tanita Pass we expect to see IFR developing there. Portage Pass looks to hold at IFR for the eastern side especially. And Chilkoot and White Pass looks like a pretty good day for your Friday. VFR conditions there. Freezing levels show that colder air still trying to work into and take over most of the Bering Sea. Freezing levels are holding around 2 to about 4,000 feet. There's warmer air still being pushed northward, and that is nudging up toward the Brooks Range, but kind of stopping there. Levels there as high as 2,000 feet. South of that, you can see a little bit of cooler weather residing across the Copper River Valley. And then as you get out toward southeast, levels climb from 2 to about 6,000 feet in total for the Panhandle. Icing potential hovering at lower levels north of the Brooks Range. In fact, some colder air will be lingering there north of the slopes, with daytime highs only approaching the freezing mark in most locations. There's a decent chance in the morning that you're going to have at least some isolated moderate in the region, so be prepared for that. South of that, levels rise pretty quickly, 4, 6, even 8,000 feet and higher for most of south central and regions in the northern Gulf to Kodiak Island. Out west, though, lowering to above about 4,000 feet. The jet stream has our trough of low pressure dug in deeply across the Bering Sea and into the North Pacific. Wind speeds there anywhere from 95 to 155 knots. The ridge of high pressure sitting across the Gulf of Alaska, sitting in that strong southerly flow into the mainland, and that is forcing that warm air further and further north. Earlier we were looking at some easterly flow across the region just a few days ago. That has gone away, but at 9,000 feet you can still see the residual effects from that north and easterly flow working down the Chukchi coast at around 10 knots. Otherwise, broad southerly flow, deep or strong ridging across the eastern Gulf. And for southeastern Alaska, winds coming in from about 25 to 30 knots or so. Southerlies over the mainland as strong as 40 knots over the Tanana Valley, and low pressure out in the west, moving things in from a west and northwesterly direction. Southwest winds across the southwest coast, 25 to 30 knots there. Southerlies a little weaker here at this level, and the ridge of high pressure firmly anchored across southeastern Alaska with just a touch of easterlies for the north slope. Here's your turbulence then. No surprise, we're looking at areas of considerable moderate across southwest, Kodiak Island, south central, improved conditions across southeast later in the afternoon after a morning start below 4,000 feet.
Cepheus.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. This week, we're going to talk about a constellation that's part of an ancient celestial story.
And more excitingly, one of its stars helped astronomers determine the size and shape of our own galaxy and the distances to nearby galaxies. Wondering what we're talking about? Let's show you. Okay, we have our skies set for an hour after sunset any night this week, facing north. Off to the northeast, you'll see the familiar W-shaped pattern of Cassiopeia the Queen. The stars that mark this constellation, starting from the top down, are Kaf, Shedar, Tse, Rukba, and Segan.
If you draw a straight line from Shedar to Kaf and keep on going, you'll run smack dab into a constellation that looks like an upside-down house. This is Cepheus the King. Cepheus was the husband of Cassiopeia and father of Andromeda.
The brightest star in Cepheus is toward the upper left at this time of night in October. That star's name is Alderamin, and it's 49 light years away from us. Since it's the brightest star in Cepheus, it's named Alpha Cephei.
Alderamin lies very close to a region of the northern sky called the Precession Circle. Over a period of 26,000 years, Earth's rotational axis passes through several constellations, tracing a giant circle in the sky. Right now, our rotational axis is pointing toward Polaris, our current North Star. However, in 7500 AD, Alderamin will be our North Star.
I'll be sure to mark that on my calendar. Traveling counterclockwise from Alderamin, we have Alpherk, also known as Beta Cephei. Alpherk is a multiple star system approximately 690 light years from Earth. Alpherk will be our North Star between 5200 AD and 7500 AD.
The next star in Cepheus is Erai, also known as Gamma Cephei. Erai marks the point on the roof of this house-shaped constellation and is a binary star system approximately 45 light years away. Erai will become our North Star in less than 1,000 years, and it will retain the title of North Star for over 2,000 years more.
When Alpherk becomes the North Star, it will have to share that title with Iota Cephei. For almost 2,000 years, they will seem to perform a nightly interstellar waltz around our north celestial pole.
Iota Cephei is a single star approximately 206 light years away from us. It's over twice the mass and over 57 times as bright and over 11 times as wide as our sun.
The fifth star in Cepheus is Zeta Cephei, an orange supergiant star over 830 light years away and over 8 times the mass of our sun. The mass value is important because it's very likely, from what we know about the processes that happen within a star, that Zeta Cephei has enough mass to ultimately go supernova.
The last star we'll talk about is one of my favorites. It's Delta Cephei, and it's just up and to the right of Zeta Cephei. This star is special because it's the prototype for a class of stars astronomers call Cepheid variables. And it's because of this star that we know the distances to nearby galaxies and realize that the universe is expanding.
In 1784, a young English astronomer named John Goodricke began observing Delta Cephei and noticed over time that it varied in brightness at regular intervals. This discovery laid the groundwork for measuring distances in the universe.
In 1908, astronomer Henrietta Leavitt was studying thousands of variable stars in the Magellanic Clouds, and she noticed that numerous stars were found to have this same relationship between their luminosity and their pulsation period.
Once the pulsation period for a particular Cepheid variable was determined, astronomers could get an accurate measurement of the star's distance by comparing the star's luminosity, which we already knew, to its observed brightness.
This relationship was so strong that it allowed subsequent astronomers to establish the size and shape of our galaxy and to determine the distances to other galaxies.
Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Onto your sea ice edge now. We're seeing new growth north of Utqiagvik and Barrow and Prudhoe Bay. We're seeing most of this due to upwelling or cold water that's coming from the surface of the ocean, below the surface anyway, and combining with cold air aloft is cooling off faster than the water around it. So new growth continues there, and also across the north coast, generally along the Beaufort Seacoast where we're seeing that right now. Gentle easterly winds are bringing in some of that colder air, but we're seeing some stronger winds across the Chukchi coast and helping to prevent sea ice, and also sea surface temperatures just aren't cold enough just yet. Let's take a look at southeast. We're expecting to see some pretty substantial changes across the outer coast as we get into tomorrow, so watch carefully. South and southeasterly winds across the inside passages will be fairly light for Friday, 5 to 10 knots at best. Looking at small seas, 2 feet, generally west and southwesterly flow across the outer coast. Onshore, 10 knots and about 8-foot seas there. A sharp change for Saturday, though. Take a look at this. A strong southerly flow comes whipping in. Strong gusts up across the northern Gulf, anywhere from 35 to 50 knots sustained, so gales to storm force winds there, and gusts 50 to 65 knots possible across the northern Gulf, all in advance of that next low pressure wave. Across the inside passage, south and southeasterly winds running around 20 to 25, and about 4 to 5 foot seas expected there as we go through your Saturday afternoon, but 10 to almost 20 foot seas there from the northern Gulf all the way down toward the Dixon entrance are possible. The smaller seas, of course, down toward the Dixon entrance. So keep watch of the weather on Saturday and certainly into Sunday if you're in southeast. For the northern Gulf and south central, we're looking at south and easterly winds 25 to 30 knots, 12 to 13 foot seas at their highest outside of Resurrection Bay and into the Barrens. Southeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 6 foot seas on a 25 knot wind. Easterlies across the northern Cook Inlet region at 20 knots, and southeasterly winds across southern Cook Inlet, 7 to 8 foot seas there. Saturday, we'll also see a quick ramp up. You'll notice the strongest winds are generally east of Cordova and south. 50-knot winds there, storm force with gusts to 65, 19-foot seas. Slightly smaller seas nearing storm force, but we're talking about high-end gales in this case, but also reaching into Prince William Sound. 45 knots there with 10-foot seas on the inside, 17-foot seas on the outside, and a south and westerly flow across southern Cook Inlet, 15 to 20, with southeasterlies across northern Cook Inlet, 15 knots and 3-foot seas expected there. As we get into southwest and Kodiak Island, looking for some 35-knot winds generally east of Kodiak and Akiak, 15-foot seas expected, with a 20 to 25-knot wind across the Alaska Peninsula waters in the Bering Sea, 7-foot seas there for your Friday, 11-foot seas south of Sand Point with a 15-knot wind. As we get into Saturday, really not a whole lot of a change. Southwesterlies continue inside of Shelikof Strait with a 5-foot sea, 8 to 9-foot seas across the Pacific coast waters, 6 to 8-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, and 20 to 25-knot winds generally coming in from the south as we get into your Saturday. For the Aleutians, a broad westerly flow is expected. Low pressure to your north will keep that possible. 8 to 10 foot seas in most areas, anywhere from 15 to about 20 knot winds across the Bering Sea coast and the Pacific coast as we go through your Friday. By Saturday, a little bit of a reversal. Low pressure is strengthening down to the south and west, and because of that, we get strong southerlies wrapping around with north and northeasterly winds all the way out toward Kiska. A little bit more of a northerly flow from Kiska to Shemya, and those are coming up to about 40 knots, 13 to 15 foot seas there, with 8 to 13 foot seas from Adak to Unalaska on the Pacific coast. And you can see a little bit of a diverging wind pattern here, 25 to 30 knots there, as low pressure is gaining more ground of control for the central and western Aleutians as you go into Saturday. All these maps online anytime if you want to check them out again. As you look at the west coast, easterlies coming out of Norton Sound, 5 to 10 foot seas there. 10 foot seas also around the Pribilofs, 25 knot winds from the west. Southerlies coming into the Kuskokwim Delta. The winds come up there on Saturday to 30 knots, looking at seas 9 to 10 feet. Northerlies around the St. Matthew Island waters, and southeasterlies blowing off the mainland, 20 to 25 knots for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island with 5 to 7 foot seas. And for the North Slope, you're looking at easterlies across Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay to Utqiagvik, 5 foot seas at their most, 15 to 20 knot winds, and east and northeasterlies across the Chukchi coast, 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas for Saturday, 15 to 20 knots in all areas, 4 to 5 foot seas for the Beaufort Sea coast, slightly smaller around Kaktovik, and an east and southeasterly wind for the Chukchi coast, 15 to 20 there, also looking at about 4 to 6 foot seas for Saturday. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Low pressure is working into the west coast. We expect to see a strong southeasterly flow working across the northern Gulf and the west coast. Snow showers continue up north. High pressure trying to break up the clouds, but the winds will whip in as we get into Saturday for parts of southeast as a low moves across south central Alaska. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.